Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derik, and today we are getting into a deck tech of one of my personal decks. And in a theme that I feel like has been ongoing now for too long, I have scripted and filmed a video for D&D, and in the middle of getting it all prepped, I decided to take a break, and I started binging a bunch of Nikachu Merfolk videos, and I decided now I need to script and film a Merfolk deck tech instead. So we are doing a deck tech on my personal Merfolk deck, which is now helmed by none other than Sygg River Guide. Now this is a really fun deck, definitely lower in power, but you can do some really crazy things with it. And if we have any fish fans out there, this is definitely a fun commander deck for y'all. So if you wanted the cards in here, because there was some spice that was put into Modern Horizons 2, and I do actually want to focus on some of those newer cards that make this deck even more fun, then head on over to TCG Player. TCG Player is phenomenal. You'll be able to find anything you're looking for, any of the different art variants and stuff. I mentioned in my bruh cards video that the showcase frames for these man lands in the D&D set is, oh my gosh, Adventures of the Forgotten Realm. If it doesn't give us anything, it gives us some of the most beautiful lands we can ever play. So definitely pick those up on there. And if you use the affiliate link down below in the description, it'll help support the channel in the process. We really always do appreciate all the help. But now let's jump into Sygg. So this is a Merfolk deck I've had for a really long time, and I was actually shocked when I look back. I've never actually really deck teched this deck before. The old version, I had it as a Kumena deck for a while. The deck tech on the channel with Kumena is actually a +1 counter themed Simic Ascendancy deck, which is not my Merfolk deck. That was actually a separate deck. So I had Kumena for a long time, and while I loved it, the Simicness was just too much. And I've mentioned this in previous videos. I've really found myself running away from Simic just because the value engines and really the play patterns of Simic, I just found I really don't enjoy playing personally anymore. So I want to try different things. And as much as I love Merfolk, I found myself almost never playing my Kumena deck. So I wanted to make a change, and I was inspired by trying to find Merfolk, looking for Merfolk, and where else would I go for Merfolk other than the Professor? And I found his own Sygg River Guide deck tech from at this point a few years ago, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna make this work. Normally, and if any of my friends are out there watching this, I promise I'm not kidnapped or sick. I did put white in a deck by choice. I realize that's exactly what I would say if I was kidnapped, but take my word for it here. I actually did this by choice, and how crazy that sounds. It's mostly blue focus, so we're just splashing white. It's not as crazy as it sounds, but it's a really fun deck. So if you're not familiar with Sygg, Sygg is 1 white and 1 blue for a 2/2 Merfolk wizard with some really interesting abilities. Now Sygg has Island Walk just inherently, which is awesome, really helpful for Merfolk obviously. And then you have this awesome ability of paying 1 and a white to give any of your Merfolk, including Sygg, protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Now this is a really cool Merfolk-centric ability. I love the protection and obviously stopping its removal from happening, but really the way it helps you get damage in is really awesome. This is going to be a swarm aggro Merfolk deck, which is interesting because they're very small creatures. Now it's definitely, if you're trying to go out there and you're just trying to beat face, if you're trying to win every game, if you are trying to assert your dominance in your pod, this ain't it. This is not what you want to be playing. But if you want to have fun with Merfolk, you want to do some tricky stuff, because that's what Merfolk are best at, you might just find this is a deck you will love. So yeah, we're going to take advantage of this protection, play some really high value Merfolk, stuff that really just helps us kind of control the board a little bit, and then use equipment and things like that to give protection and punch damage through, and see if we can get in that late game, be the last one standing, and let the fish come out on top. So obviously we're going to start with the creatures, because this is a very creature-centric deck. This is going to be the main focus of it. And I do want to focus on some of the Merfolk we get from Modern Horizons 2. Now this is almost all of our creatures are Merfolk. It's very much, when I build tribal decks, I want to make sure almost everything in the deck is of that tribe, more thematically than anything else, with just a few things to kind of supplement that if needed. But the Modern Horizons 2 Merfolk are some of the coolest. Now Sygg is so awesome, and one of the most important things about this card obviously is the art. Abilities are cool, all that, but staring at the card is much more fun. And the 2 arts, I have the showcase full art Sygg in my personal deck, but I realized, yeah, this art is awesome, but the Seb art on the old border one is also insanely beautiful, and I can't run 2. I mean, I could cheat and try, but I feel like my friends would catch on, so I can't run both of them. So I decided instead to get the playmat of the Seb McKinnon art and then the full art in the deck. And that's that real tech, that's that important stuff for this deck. You got to get your style right, you got to get the art right for the whole deck to flow right. I believe it's the Deion Sanders quote: if you look good, you play good, or if you look good, you feel good, if you feel good, you play good, something to that effect. Same rules go for this Merfolk deck, so I had to make sure I got all my arts right. And Sygg, mechanically as well, is an amazing card. Being able to attack in, be indestructible, draw you cards, because unlike Kumena, you don't have card draw stapled onto your commander. getting card draw in other places is really important in this deck, especially where we can really overextend at times, put a bunch of Merfolk out, and a board wipe really does not feel good. So having any type of card draw we can have on our creatures is huge. Tide Shaper is also awesome. Giving Island Walk is really the form of evasion for Merfolk. That's how we're going to get through, and being able to turn lands into islands is huge. Now, obviously in Modern, this is more important using this as opposed to Spreading Seas because it's on a body. The body's not technically as important, but I really like Modern Merfolk, so I had to make sure all of the Modern Merfolk pieces are in this deck just for reasons. So I really like the old border. It's really pretty, and yeah, being able to turn an opponent's land into an island, it's land destruction, pseudo destruction, because you can get rid of those Cabal Coffers, those Gaia's Cradles, that crazy stuff like that, while also enabling your army to get through with Island Walk, which is amazing. Now, a similar card that's interesting is Rashad and Dockhand. Now, I know this card is kind of like iffy in Modern from my understanding. Some decks are playing it, some decks aren't, and on first glance it might not seem like it's great in Commander, but just having a 1-drop Merfolk in a Merfolk deck is wonderful. So a lot of the synergies care about having out Merfolk or casting Merfolk or different things like that. So literally just 1 mana for a vanilla Merfolk at times could be worth it. Not to mention the fact that Rashad and Port is just one of the coolest cards ever. It's just an amazing card. Just so to see the flavor of putting that on the creature is awesome. And there are times, if you play this earlier just to get your synergies, it's not a high priority removal target. It's probably just going to sit there, and there are going to be times where you can go ahead and tap down your opponent's Cradle or Cabal Coffers or things like that on their upkeep without them even really thinking about it, because it's just this little Merfolk that they're probably not paying attention to on board. So you can still do some tricky stuff despite the fact that it might not be an all-star in EDH. One that is an all-star in EDH though that has been released relatively recently is Thieving Skydiver. This card is absolutely amazing. I have had, when I first put it in, I was, oh, this is going to be a cool card, whatever. This has probably been the best Merfolk in this deck that isn't just directly a win con. Almost every game I'm able to steal Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots, or if you get this out early, maybe steal someone's Soul Ring. This is just, you have this in hand and you feel wonderful, especially now jumping outside of green, where this is essentially blue splashing a little bit of white. Being able to steal mana rocks is amazing. This is essentially just a versatile mana rock that sometimes can turn into stealing your opponent's best equipment and going the Voltron route. And somehow this is flying. I guess some fish do fly. There are flying fish. That is a thing. So I guess it makes sense. But the evasion on this is great too, because you're gonna have equipment out suiting up your Merfolk, and having a built-in form of evasion besides Island Walk can be huge, especially in the late game. And then I just want to touch on some of my personal favorite Merfolk that I get most excited to cast when I play this deck, that just get me feeling all good inside it. And one of them is going to be Empress Galena. This card is incredibly powerful. It's got little seal buddies. I think those are little sea lions. I'm not good with my nature things, but yeah, there's these little adorable creatures hanging out with Empress Galena. It's awesome, and this card is just so powerful. If this gets out and you untap with it, you feel amazing, especially with some of the tapping, untapping shenanigans that you still have in this deck. You just steal a legend. It can be any legend. It can be a Gaia's Cradle that I've mentioned. It can be a commander. You know, those are legends. That's important. It's the versatility is insane. And I've gotten it. I mentioned this deck doesn't win a ton, but the games that I am able to close out so many times, it's because I'm able to get Empress Galena out. And you get late in the game where it might be only 2 or 3 players left, and the value you get is just too insane. You can basically steal one of their most important cards every turn. It doesn't go back to them. It's delicate. It dies a lot, but when it does stick around, it does work. Another Merfolk that I just get so excited to have out is Sigil Tracer. Sigil Tracer is so good because so many of our Merfolk just happen to be wizards, and our commander is a wizard. So we're basically always going to have one out, including Sigil Tracer itself. Very important. This is just really tricky, and that's really what this deck is about. And as we get into the other categories, you'll see is you want to do the whole swarming, tribal, punch people thing, but with Merfolk, it takes a while to get there, and you need these little tricky shenanigans in the process. Being able to copy spells with leaving some mana up is just so much fun. It's basically like just being able to fork random stuff at any given time, and it makes up for some of the weaknesses. We don't have green, which literally does everything. So there's always going to be a green deck at the table. We can go ahead, copy those overpowered broken green cards, and play green in Azorius, because that's probably our best chance to win. And then that's going to wrap it up for the Merfolk. The only other card I would mention that isn't a Merfolk is going to be Drift of Phantasms. And I know I just said we want all Merfolk to stay on flavor, and I realized this is some ghost spirity thingy. But what's important is the Transmute on here, and it's the Transmute 3. It's going to get us a lot of important artifacts we have in this deck that you'll see in a little bit. I would definitely, it breaks flavor and it kind of hurts my heart, but you would want to put that in there, because swords are 3 mana. Spoiler alert. and they're really important to getting this deck running. And with the enchantments, we have some just Merfolk staples at this point with Deep Root Waters and with Kindred Discovery. Those are in a lot of tribal decks, especially Merfolk. But a newish card that has just again done work is Reflections of Lijar. This card is amazing. Being able to copy our Merfolk is huge, especially because so many of our Merfolk either are lords, so it just doubles the pumping effect, or we get utility out of them and we kind of get that double effect as well. And I think by now y'all probably have seen in my blue decks, I really don't run Rhystic Study. I just don't like the card. Well, I mean, it is annoying, but not only because of that, just because I can't remember to ask for it. I've spent 3 mana on Rhystic Study and drawn no cards because I forget about the tags so many times. So we're going to play a more flavorful version, and that's Mystic Remora. This is just as much of a staple. You see it just as much, but it's a fish. We can't not put the fish card in the fish deck. I mean, it's kind of just the rules. And then with the artifacts, we have tons and tons and tons of ramp. We're in Azorius. We need to ramp with our artifacts. That's just a thing. And one thing I do really like in this deck is I love, and this is just across my decks now, I just love 3 CMC rocks. I know they're kind of like not the hot thing anymore, and Dark Stealing It is apparently not a good card. I love that shit. I'm putting it in all my decks. I really like 3 CMC rocks because I like a slower paced game. I kind of like going at my own tempo. I move slowly. Probably not the best strategy for winning, but I do enjoy playing at that pace. So I do really love, especially with all of the cool new abilities thrown onto these. So I'm definitely going to run a Midnight Clock in here, especially in an aggro deck where you're trying to play out your hand. This is great. Turn 2 Sygg, turn 3 Midnight Clock, and then you just really not worry about it. Play all your Merfolk out, because then you're just going to go ahead and refill your hand. In a deck with this low of CMC, the losing of the mana rock a few turns later really doesn't hurt you. But there's just so many other things like this. Cultivator's Caravan is a 3 CMC rock. That is great because it allows us to tap our Merfolk. I love Strixhaven Stadium in here because, yeah, we have a bunch of 2/2s. Sometimes we make tokens that are 1/1s. Hitting with 10 creatures might not be enough to kill anyone by itself, so having an alternate win con on a rock is just super fun. It's a weird little mini game. It's always a good time. The card I'm probably most excited to give a try, that I think I've only gotten out once yet, is Archaeomancer's Map. This card seems insane. Seems so broken. I absolutely love it. I've actually ran more planes in this deck than the mana split would suggest I should, just to make sure I can always get 2 with this. This is a deck where, based on my experience of playing it too, I'm usually behind on lands and I have a really low curve, so it usually doesn't hurt. But just having essentially a burgeoning in a blue-white deck, yeah, I get why this card is expensive. The one time I did get to play it, it felt wonderful. And now let's get into these equipment, the swords and the blade. Black Blade Reforged is the one I'll start with, just because this card is the best way, basically, to commander damage. It turns any deck into a Voltron deck, and I freaking love that, where it doesn't matter what your strategy is. If you think you might not be able to close the game out, just throw in a Black Blade Reforged. End of the game, you're probably going to be able to do some work with it. It does a wonderful job in here, especially with Sygg, the protection. Even, you know, turn 3, 4, 5, you're getting significant chunks of damage through. And then the next category of equipment are going to be things that care about connecting. And because we have this protection and island walk and all this, getting through for damage is much more realistic than maybe some other decks are. So stuff like Dowsing Dagger is phenomenal. Flips into a land Gilded Lotus, you're always going to be able to get through for damage. It's a wonderful early game ramp card to really set you up and get you some big turns, especially when we have tappy untappy shenanigans. Yeah, this can really net you a ton of mana. And then with the equipment, you have so much flexibility. I kind of went the basic route. I was feeling pretty basic. And I went with the Sword of Feast of Famine, Fire and Ice, and War and Peace, basically just because I have fancy, pretty versions of them. And for my personal deck, I wanted it to be fancy and pretty, so I just slotted those in. You have so much flexibility. You know you're going to get through. So if you prefer Sinew and Steel, or if you prefer that new Hearth and Home, put those in. Whatever equipment you enjoy and make you happy are great in here. I really have found War and Peace to do way more work than I ever expected it to. I mainly just picked it up because I found a cheap foil and it had the little watermark on it. I thought that was pretty. But life gain, incidentally, like this, is huge. And there are a ton of games where I've gotten into where people are drawing crazy cards late game, doing, I see you Simic decks, I see what you're doing, 20, 30 cards in hand, and War and Peace can just be straight up killing someone at that point, with the upside of, if your life gets low, kind of replenishing it turn by turn. It is just overall something that isn't seen as a threat like Feast and Famine or Fire and Ice, but to me just does a ton of work. And then with the instants, I'm actually playing a ton of counter spells in this deck, not because I like them. I'm not someone, if you ever played against me, you probably won't see me counter much. It's not something I find fun, but in this deck, I feel like it's necessary. It takes so much work to fill your board and so much work to get everything set up with your Merfolk. A bad board wipe just means you're out of the game, or a bad removal spell just might mean you're done. So you really want to be able to keep protection. But like I always say, I want to focus on versatile counter spells. So I want stuff like Cryptic Command. Obviously, for flavor purposes, I had to play the textless Cryptic Command with the Merfolk hand. I never remember what it does. I always have to look it up. Realize this is the worst card basically ever to have no text on it, but it's flavorful and I gotta put it in there. I got to have it. I got to do it. I love Mystic Confluence for the same reason. You can draw cards, you can bounce creatures, tons of versatility. Sublime Epiphany, all those different cards like that are just so good in here because, yeah, I can keep the mana up to protect myself, but I don't feel pressure to just counter something for the hell of it. Worst case, I can always, copy a Merfolk, draw a card, or bounce one of your creatures, draw a card, and not just keep the counter spell to counter something unnecessary and cause some feel bads. Two really fun interactive cards that I've tried in this instant slot that kind of get slotted in and out just depending on what day of the week, basically, for me. One's Narset's Reversal. This is not a surprise. It's a really powerful card. You're going to see it in a ton of decks. I really have fun with this because, again, it's going to give us access to things outside our color pie. Nothing really feels better for me than turn 2 Narset's Reversaling someone's Cultivate in this deck, or turn 4ing their Explosive Vegetation, or whatever it is. Stealing things outside of the color pie is tons of fun, and worst case, you can always do something to stop an uncounterable spell, stop some crazy stuff. It's just really versatile, and it almost reminds me of a card like a Mirage Mirror, where it looks good on paper, you might not end up playing it much, but it's just so many things in game that you always feel safe when you have it. And the other one, just shout out to Dana Roach, it's Overwhelming Intellect. He's shouted out this card quite a few times on the EDH Recast, and I've always heard him talk about it, and I was like, you know what, let me give this thing a try. Oh my gosh, this is fun. 6 mana counterspell, so you already know I'm on board for that. But drawing cards equal to the CMC, so many commanders are 4 or 5 CMC, and when you get to the late game and people are just holding up mana, passing with 6 mana, especially in this deck where you have to use mana for protection and instant speed shenanigans anyway, really doesn't feel bad. And basically every time I've cast this, I drew 4, 5, 6 cards in addition to countering one of their biggest threats. I'm just straight up stealing this from Dana Roach, so thank you, sir. But this card is phenomenal. And with the sorcery, Supreme Verdict, I have to run. We don't get the board wipe very much, but it is uncounterable. It is amazing. Now, one thing that you can do, and I do this back and forth, I currently have a copy of a Cyclonic Rift in this deck. I love to Petty Rift. So if y'all aren't familiar, Petty Rifting is where you targeted Cyclonic Rift. Doesn't matter. You can have 10 mana available, but if you targeted Cyclonic Rift somebody's thing with all that mana available, basically it's just showing you are petty as hell and you just wanted that one thing gone, even though you could have gotten everything. That's the thing you wanted. So Petty Rifting is one of my favorite things to do in Magic. So I do have it in here currently, but I basically switch it out back and forth with River's Rebuke, which would be in the sorcery category. River's Rebuke is much more flavorful, and it's the ultimate petty rift. You're literally just rifting one single player. So that is a card that you can kind of work in here as well, especially just because it's so much cheaper. Now with the lands, 2 colors. So really basics is all you're going to need, but one of the things, Academy Ruins is just so good. So good. We have so many important equipments in this deck. We don't run a ton of them, so being able to recur them just on a land slot is kind of huge in this deck. Plus the art's kind of underwatery and on flavor, so I had to do it. Now Mutavault's also a great card, which has gotten way cheaper in recent years, so if you have a copy of that, definitely helpful. Not necessary, but that can help you get some extra damage in late game, which can always be great. And the last one is Riptide Laboratory, which got reprinted very recently. I think it might have been a couple times, but it definitely just got reprinted. And this is just an amazing card to protect a lot of your wizards on a land, instant speed. Really, really nice to have. And outside of that, whatever duels you have access to are great, but again, 2 colors, and especially in a deck that's this focused on blue, you're not going to have much trouble with it running mostly basics, and it'll even make some of the synergies with stuff like Archaeomancer's Map and stuff even better. Alright, now that's going to do it for all the categories in this deck. Now let's get into the best part of every deck tech. In this case, the fishiest part. It's the game winning step. How are we about to win the game with this deck? Now, the first way to win the game is going to be a little bit basic, and it's going to be just backfinning all your opponents with your little fishies. And that's really the most consistent way, where you kind of use your removal spells and your control with all your little tricky fishies and try to stay alive. And if you can stay alive and you get to that last part where it's either 1-on-1 or maybe a 3-man pot at that point, all of a sudden stuff like Empress Galena, Sigil Tracer, your bounce effects, they all become a lot more intimidating. And if you can just focus on one opponent and that's all you have to worry about, your commander becomes much scarier because the protection means a lot more. You're punching damage through with your equipments, and you can really finish off the game pretty quick. Now, the second way to win the game is going to be through combo. Now, I normally don't love combo, but in a deck like this that really kind of has a low win rate, sometimes it's nice to have a backup win if you just really stuff hasn't been going your way and you need to try to pull something out. And the best part is cut one card and all the combo stuff's out of there and you're just having just as much fun. And that's Intruder Alarm. So if you do want to have combo centric stuff, it is with Intruder Alarm, and you can use it with Stony Brook Schoolmaster and any sort of effect that lets you tap down that Schoolmaster. Because you can tap it, make a Merfolk, untap everything, tap it, and you can basically have Infina Merfolk. And it's similar with Lone Mage Mentor, where if you have enough Merfolk out, you can tap all those, I believe it's 7, make a token, counter a spell, untap everything, and you can basically get into a situation where you can just counter every spell that people play, which can definitely be kind of annoying, really hard to pull off. I think in my years of playing Merfolk deck, I think I've pulled it off once. and I think I still lost that game. So it's not something that's going to happen very often, but it is a cool backup win con to have in there. Now, the third, because there's a lot of different ways, and that's one of the most fun things about this deck. It's super versatile. The third way to win the game in this deck is with the little combo thing that I haven't really pulled off. I think I've pulled it off once. Super fun. It's like the dream of this deck. It is the Magical Christmas Land, and it's to Rite of Replication one of your lords, because that's all I want to do. Now, normally I'm very sad that Lord of Atlantis is not legendary. I want it to be a commander. It's beautiful. It's iconic. But in this case, I am happy because I can Rite of Replication that Lord of Atlantis, get a whole bunch of it Lord of Atlantises, and all of a sudden everything is just buff as hell. This is wonderful. It makes everything giant, island walk, and if you have any sort of way to make your opponents lands into islands, or if they have islands, that is just game over. I realize Rite of Replication just wins games anyway, but this is the most flavorful way to do it and the fishiest way, and that's what I'm going for every time. If I have that Rite of Replication, I am saving it so I can try to do this every time I play this deck. And now, of course, it is time for our weekly trip to Phyrexia. Y'all didn't think I was going to forget Phyrexia, even in a Azorius Merfolk deck. That is not possible. And it's because, you know, we have equipment. Why not throw in the most beautiful, most perfect piece of equipment in Grafted Exoskeleton? This is an amazing card in here. There have been games that I have been able to just kill someone pettily out of nowhere with a Grafted Exoskeleton, and it is beautiful, especially in combination with things like Blackblade Reforge or with different Lord effects. Sometimes you can get to cool situations where you play 3-4 Lords, things get buffed up, you get one equipment, and bam, that Grafted Exoskeleton is all you need to finish somebody off. It is a wonderful card, and from a practical, non-Phyrexian obsessed perspective, because I realize I'm incredibly biased, it is also really cool to stop life gain decks, to stop decks that kind of have just gone off the rails where you can't try to slow them down, and especially in a deck like this where I will say maybe about half the time I cut Intruder Alarm, so I don't always have that combo option. It is a nice option to, if stuff gets out of hand, finish the game off. And y'all know, no matter what deck I play, it has to have a little bit of that Phyrexian oil just, you know, dripped on top. That is going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. This is one of my favorite personal decks. If y'all have watched Commander Petty, I play this all the time on Commander Petty. If y'all have ever played against me in person or see me in person, you've probably played against this deck at some point. I play Merfolk a lot. It is a ton of fun. And one of my favorite things is, one, I can break this out against literally any pod. And now if it's a higher level pod, I'm probably not going to do much, but at least I'm not oppressing the game. And if it's a lower level pod, it really does give me that flexibility where I can interact in high level pods and not win, and be competitive in lower level pods. And very few decks I have, I feel like, can play in this wide of a range of play styles, not to mention all the different win cons I can try to go for. It really helps the deck not be stale and just keeps it feeling fresh over time. As always, a huge shout out to the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much, and really thank you for believing in what we do. And there is so much exciting stuff to come. I still have D&D stuff. I have Adventures of the Forgotten Realm. I have a few videos scripted and more than one filmed, I think. But I needed to take it aside because sometimes I have the attention span of a squirrel, and I got very excited about Merfolk today, so this had to happen. But don't worry, plenty of new stuff to come. And I think we do have a break, as much as I joke, a pretty sizable break before Innistrad stuff starts. So we're going to get into a lot of my personal decks over the course of the next couple months that I've really been putting on the back burner, and I'm really excited to get into them. But until then, I will see y'all next time.